Welcome to Mrs. Bays' 6th grade math video lesson. This is the second video on the series Reading and Writing Expressions. Before we begin looking at our notes and guided practice, I would like to go over these two reference sheets. The first one is Words and Phrases to Math Symbols. In the first video, I asked you to go under subtraction and include these three or write these three in. Subtract from, less than, and take away from. When you see these three phrases, that means we will need to make a switch. In the first video, I showed you what I mean by that, and in this video, I will do the same. This is the other reference sheet. It has a few more examples of words or phrases that we use for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Let's begin by looking at our notes and guided practice number 2. In this lesson, we're going to look at what is called two steps or two operation expressions. To do this, I'm going to use my highlighter. I'm going to use my pen where I'm writing my answers, but I'm going to write or use another different color pen, and you might want to use maybe another colored pencil to kind of split these expressions into halves so we know where each part, or basically how do we read the phrases and then write them is what I'm meaning. Okay, so let's begin. Number 1, add 1/6 to 2 times C. So I'm going to have two different phrases I'm looking at. So I'm first going to take my first pen and I'm going to divide where my two parts are by phrases. Add 1/6 to, add 1/6 to what? 2 times C. So I'm going to make my first mark here where I am dividing this in half. So my first half I am to add. And I'm to add 1/6. Well, 1/6 is a fraction. So I'm going to write 1/6 right below 1/6. And I'm going to put my plus sign. And now if I look at the second half, I'm using my highlighter again, to 2 times C. Well, that obviously means we're going to multiply. And to write that, we could write it as 2 times C with the X. Now I want to get away from using this X, so another way that we could write this correctly would be 1/6 plus 2 big dot C. But I want us to update our information and be ready to proceed in algebra. So I want us to know that anytime you have a number and a letter side by side with no operation, meaning add, subtract, multiply, or divide, between them, that is called implied multiplication, which means you are to know that you are to multiply, but you're not going to see a sign that tells you to multiply. So over here, I'm going to write the answer that I would like to see when you put your answer in Edge Elastic. So that's going to be 1/6, and you'll have to use the slash for this fraction bar, plus 2C. Notice no symbol for multiplication between the number and the letter. Number 2, first let's divide it into halves. 5/6 of the sum of W and 8. 5/6 of. So I'm going to stop right there and put my little mark. And the key word in this first half is of. So if I look at my reference sheet, I see that of is a word that means multiplication. So that means we're going to multiply. So first I'm going to write 5/6, that's a fraction, and we will be multiplying, so I'm going to put a little X to mean that. And now we have the phrase, the sum of, and I want to look at that on our reference sheet. So under parentheses words, we have the quantity of, twice the sum of, times the sum of, times the difference of, plus the difference of. And in this example, it is the sum of. So the sum of means we're going to have to use parentheses. So I'm going to go ahead and include the parentheses. And what are we going to do? Well, here we have the word sum, which means we are going to add. What are we adding? W and 8. Now, we could also write this as 5/6 with a nice big dot for multiplication. And then our left parenthesis, W plus 8, right parenthesis. But again, I want us to know that whenever we have a number, and in this case, a fraction, next to a set of parentheses, it's just like having a number next to a letter. It's called implied multiplication, where it means you're to multiply, you're supposed to know to multiply, but you're not going to see a sign that specifically tells you to multiply. So it should look like this. You'll use the slash for the fraction bar, the left parenthesis, W plus 8, right parenthesis. Notice no multiplication symbol that's visible between the fraction and the set of parentheses. Number 3, 2 is added to 1/3 of n. So first let's mark it. 2 is added. So I know I have the number 2. And I'm going to highlight added because that is my key word that tells me what operation I'm doing, because addition is considered to be an operation, to 1/3 of n. Well, the next key word is of. And again, let's look at our reference sheet. Of means multiplication. So we're going to multiply. 1/3 of means times, and then the letter n. Or we can write it as 2 plus 1/3 big dot n. And again, I want us to think about what I've talked about so far here with knowing about and using implied multiplication. When I take out the big dot and I write it as 1/3 n with no visible multiplication sign between the fraction and the letter, that is implied multiplication. This is the kind of work I'd like to see on Edge Elastic. Number 4. Add 2 to 5 times c. So add 2, let's stop there. The key word here is add, so we are definitely going to be adding. That's a plus sign. So I'm going to write 2 plus, and the second half is to 5 times c. And times is our second operation or second step. So that would be 5 times c, or 2 plus 5 big dot c. But again, I want to rewrite this, and I want you to put this in Edge Elastic as 2 plus 5c, where 5c is considered to be implied multiplication because you do not see a sign that tells you to multiply. You are supposed to know to multiply between the number and the letter that are next to each other. Number 5, 5/6 of x is subtracted from 9. 5/6 of x, so I'm going to stop there, is subtracted from 9. 5/6 of x. Okay, of is our key word that tells us we're going to multiply. So I'm going to write 5/6 as a fraction, x. Now, here's the problem with using x. See, this is a letter and not a sign for multiplication. So if I put 5/6 xx, that looks odd or strange. So instead of putting another x here, because this x needs to be this letter, of does mean multiplication, I'm going to go ahead and put a big dot here to show that multiplication. And now the second part is subtracted from 9. Well, subtracted from. Well, that means to subtract 9. But when I go back to my reference sheet, see where I have subtract from? Subtracted from would be the same. We have to make a switch. So I'm going to star this, and I'm also going to write the word switch to help us remember. So the switch means the subtraction is still going to be in the middle, so to speak, but what comes after the subtraction sign actually goes first. And what we think should come first actually comes after. So here I'll write 5/6 x. And again, I'm going to use that implied multiplication by not putting the big dot between these two. This is what I want to see in Edge Elastic. Number 6, 7 is subtracted from 1/4 of b. So 7 is subtracted from. So I'm going to put my division here. Here's my 2 parts, or my 2 steps. I should have 2 operations in this. My key phrase is subtracted from. So I know I'm going to subtract. So I have 7 minus. And in the second half, my keyword is of, which means I'm going to multiply. So that's 1/4 of means times, and then the letter b. But again, when I look at subtract from is one of those key phrases that we have to make a switch. So again, I'm going to mark it to help us remember to make that switch. The subtraction sign is going to stay the same in the middle, so to speak. That means what comes after the subtraction sign is going to come first. And I'm going to use implied multiplication. And what we think should come first actually comes after, so we're going to put the 7 after the subtraction symbol. Number 7. 3 less than 5 times s. 3 less than. Let's stop there. Well, less than is our phrase. So I know it's going to be 3. Less than does mean to subtract, but look, less than is one of those switch phrases. And the second keyword in this example is times. So that means to multiply. So 5 times s. Now, less than, that's one of our switch phrases, so I'm going to mark it that we need to switch to help us remember. That means the subtraction sign is going to stay in the middle, so to speak. But what comes after the subtraction sign, this 5 times s, let's write this as implied multiplication. That would be 5s. And then the 3 that we see is before the subtraction symbol actually goes behind it. Number 8, 5 times the sum of 8 and w. So I'm going to make my first mark here. Times is my first keyword, which means multiply. So I have 5 times. And notice where it says the sum of. Well, if I refer to my reference sheet, the sum of, I'm only going to look at this part. The sum of means I need parentheses. So I'm going to put in my parenthesis. And what am I going to do in there? Add 8 and w. I could rewrite this as 5 with a big dot, left parenthesis, 8 plus w. But I want us to use implied multiplication. So that means I'm going to write 5, and right next to it, I'm going to use my left parenthesis, 8 plus w. That's the answer I want you to use in Edge Elastic. I want us to get used to using implied multiplication. Number 9, 1/9 of the sum of 7 and n. I'm sorry, 1/3. 1/3 of the sum of 7 and n. So 1/3 of, we'll stop there. 1/3 of. Of is our key word, which means we're going to multiply. So 1/3 is a fraction. Of means to times. Now see the phrase, the sum of. So if we go to our reference sheet, here's the sum of, means we need parentheses. And sum means we're going to add. So what are we adding? 7 and n. We could also rewrite this as 1/3 with a big dot and left parentheses 7 plus n. But the way I'd like for you to write it is with implied multiplication. So that would be 1/3 left parenthesis 7 plus n right parenthesis. So include the left and the right parentheses. Let's look at the last one. Subtract 3 from 2 times b. Well, we're going to divide it right here between the from and the to. And our phrase in the first half is subtract from. So we know we're going to subtract. So I'm going to write 3 minus. Times is our key phrase in the second half. So that would be 2 times with the x, b. But if I refer to my reference sheet, see, subtract from, we have subtract from even with that number separating these two words. This one tells us we need to make a switch. So we're going to keep the subtraction sign. And we're going to write 2 times b as implied multiplication first. That's 2b. And the 3 then will be moved behind the subtraction symbol. So this is how I'd like for it to be written in Edulastic. I hope you followed along and wrote these out as I showed you these and explained them. Now I'd like for you to practice some independent practice. You are to do these 10 problems. I highly recommend that you put them on paper first and then upload your answers into Edulastic. Thank you.